Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have published our first ever anthology from Stories on Stage Sacramento. 2020, 43 stories from a year like no other, which it certainly was. And there are, in fact, 43 stories in it and just about that many authors. So we're beginning with Sans Hall. And I don't know if you want to just say hi, Sans.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm honored and thrilled to have my story in this anthology, my fun little essay that I wrote exactly for this anthology. Really honored to be asked to contribute. Thank you, Dorothy and Shelley.
Oh, thank you. And I think it was about this time last year that you were on the program with Deborah Gwartney. And that was such a wonderful weekend of events.
One of the great pleasures of the year, I have to say.
Yeah, it was super fun. So Sans is the author of the memoir, Reclaiming My Decade, Lost in Scientology, which was an excerpt from which was performed on Stories on Stage last year. It was a finalist for the Northern California Book Award and a Publishers Weekly Best Book in Religion and Spirituality. Her novel, Catching Heaven, is a Penguin Random House Reader's Circle selection and a Willa Literary Award finalist for Best Contemporary Fiction. She's also the author of a book of writing essays and exercises, Tools of the Writer's Craft. Her stories and essays have been published widely in prestigious journals. And she also has an extensive acting and directing resume and released a wonderful CD of her original songs called Wrestler's Moon, which is just a beautiful, beautiful song. Go to her website and you can see some of her music performed or hear it. She's also Professor Emeritus, if I said that right, at Franklin and Marshall College, teaches for the Community of Writers and the Iowa Summer Writing Festival, among other conferences. And Sans lives in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada here in California. So welcome to Sans. Our next author, and I'm not sure if he's here, is Joshua Mohr. Joshua is the author of the memoirs Model Citizen, which is actually on my to-be-read pile right now, and Sirens, which I loved. Model Citizen just came out 2021, as well as 5 novels, including Damascus, which the New York Times called Beat Poet Cool. He's also written Fight Song and Some Things That Meant the World to Me, one of O Magazine's top 10 reads of 2009 and a San Francisco Chronicle bestseller, as well as Termite Parade, an editor's choice in the New York Times. His novel, All This Life, won the Northern California Book Award, and he's the founder of Decant Editorial. So hopefully he'll join us and you can meet Joshua Mohr. Our next author is Deborah Meltvedt, as in velvet, which I just learned.
Hi, everybody. Nice to also see a lot of my wonderful writing peeps from Team Hague on our wonderful writing group, which is so fun to see everybody.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's wonderful. Deborah is a writer and medical science teacher who lives in Sacramento. She's been published in the American River Literary Review, Under the Gum Tree, Susurrus, and the creative nonfiction magazine Anthology, What I Didn't Know, True Stories of Becoming a Teacher. Her first book of poems, which is just a beautiful book, is Building a Woman, published this year by Poetry Box Press. Deborah lives in Sacramento with her husband Rick and their cat, Anchovy Jack. And I have to add, her alter ego is a wisely cynical cat named Harvey, who I think you'll be hearing a lot more about soon. Our next author is P. Joshua Laskey.
Hello. Thanks for coming, everybody, and thank you especially to Shelley and Dorothy and Sue and Jessica. Making a book is no small feat, so I applaud you.
Oh, thanks so much for being here. And P. Joshua is originally from Sacramento, currently living and writing in Dallas, Texas. His published work includes original, adapted, and translated plays, as well as original and award-winning self-translated short stories, flash fiction, and poetry. And he's proud to have performed for both Stories on Stage Sacramento and Stories on Stage Davis. So a multi-talented, multi-genre individual. Our next author, and I believe she was one of our first authors as we were learning Zoom last April, is Anita Felicelli.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think it was your first Zoom Zoom performance. Thank you, Dorothy and Shelley and Sue. It's just such a great event, and I'm just really honored and touched to have my story included in this wonderful anthology.
Yeah, you bet. Anita is the author of the novel Comerica and the short story collection Love Songs for a Lost Continent, which won the 2016 Mary Roberts Reinhardt Award. Anita's stories have appeared in The Normal School, Joyland, The Rumpus, and other places. Her essays, reviews, and criticism have appeared in the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, LA Review of Books, and elsewhere. She graduated from UC Berkeley and the UC Berkeley School of Law and is a member of the National Book Critics Circle and a Voices of Our Nations alum. She lives in the Bay Area with her family. And our next author is Devara Berger.
I'm Dev Berger, and I'm really honored to be with all the wonderful people and want to thank Dorothy and everybody else involved, Shelley. I think it was fabulous what you've done. And I'm so thrilled to be with Team Haig writers, of course. They've been absolutely inspiring, and these events like this are as well. So I'm really grateful, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for being here, Dev. You're going to enjoy her story. Dev has worked as an editor and a writer for a variety of organizations. Her nonfiction articles were published in magazines and newspapers, and her poetry has appeared in journals in Australia and the United States. She lives in Sacramento with her 2 dogs. And our 7th author today is Pam Houston, and we're hoping she'll be able to join us later in the program, which is why we placed her last, because she has a competing event. Pam, who was our very first author when Shelley and I assumed the management of Stories on Stage Sacramento last January. So our first and last in-person performance was Pam Houston and Deep Creek, Finding Hope in the High Country, a wonderful memoir. She also is the author of 2 novels, Contents May Have Shifted and Sighthound, 2 collections of short stories, Cowboys Are My Weakness and Waltzing the Cat, and a collection of essays, A Little More About Me. Her fiction has been selected for volumes of the O. Henry Awards, the Pushcart Prize, the Best American Travel Writing, Best American Short Stories of the Century, among many other anthologies and awards. So with that, I will turn it over to Jessica to introduce our actors.
Gladly. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. So as Dorothy explained at the beginning, we'll be having the actors switch off, and I tried to do it basically one story from a slightly female perspective, slightly male perspective, and then we'll just switch back and forth. So our 2 actors who will be doing that with us this evening are Kelley Ogden, if you want to say hi.
Hello.
And I'll give Kelley's bio briefly. There's a lot to know, so I recommend that you obviously look for both of these folks, Kelley and Brennan, online because they've done a lot of stuff. But briefly, Kelley Ogden is an accomplished performer, director, and producer whose work has been seen throughout the area. She's the co-founder of the acclaimed fringe theater company Colt Run Creations, and she has performed with Capitol Stage, Davis Shakespeare Festival, Sacramento Shakespeare Festival, Main Street Theater Works, Theater Galatea, and many others. And Kelley earned her BFA in performance from the theater school at DePaul University in Chicago. So we're very happy to have her. She has read for us actually a few times, so we're very lucky she's back. Same thing with Brennan. Actually, if you attended the anthology reading that we had back in December, Brennan was one of our performers as well. So Brennan Villados, do you want to say hi real quick?
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me back.
Yay. Glad to have you. So Brennan is also based in Sacramento, and his most recent acting credits include The Picture of Dorian Gray with Free Fall Stage, A Soldier's Play with Celebration Arts, and Marat Sade with Falcon's Eye Theater. And Brennan made his directorial debut in 2019 with Romeo and Juliet for Free Fall Stage's Shakespeare in the Park. He attended the American Academy of Dramatic Art and has worked for the UC Davis School of Medicine Standardized Patient Program for the last 6 years, which is actually how I met him. So We're very excited to have both of them here with us tonight, and we'll just kind of, like I said, bounce back and forth so that you get sort of a nice rhythm to the reading. So first story is Surrendered by Sands Hall.
Lucy lived to 22. Half Himalayan, she was a lovely dove gray, eyes as green as the spring tufts on pine trees. She went on walkabout. I never did find her body. Una, tortoiseshell with kidney issues, went in her sleep at 17. They died within months of each other. My grief was fierce. I could not imagine another cat. Now and again, I'd hold a friend's dog and think about a little poodle Maltese Papillion mix that would fit perfectly on my lap, look up at me with sparkling, happy eyes, and be very cute. But I was dismayed by the idea that you couldn't leave a dog for hours, certainly not overnight, as you could a cat, with food, water, and a litter box. They seemed like such a commitment. In any case, I couldn't imagine how I could ever love an animal as I had the fine cat Una, with her expressive tail that curled and looped, writing magical words in the air. Then came the pandemic. I made it through a few weeks of lockdown before, with the encouragement of my sister Brett, who's rescued a number of dogs, I signed up on Pet Finder. For months, I scrolled through photos and descriptions, mostly dogs, some cats, but I could not make the move to fill my heart with another animal. It reminded me, in a most disconcerting way, of my efforts on Match.com. I'd find a profile that ticked most of the boxes, maybe even settle into a brief correspondence, but the energy would balk when I considered an actual meeting. I'm not sure what finally tilted me toward action. Perhaps it was the NPR essay that talked about all the dogs currently so happy having their humans around all the time, and the anxiety that would ensue once humans headed back to their offices. Perhaps it felt selfish not to share my home. Perhaps it was that all the aggregate faces of those abandoned, lost, unhomed animals began to fester. Suddenly, it was time. Within 2 days, I'd sent in queries about a pair of half-Siamese siblings and a dog who, in his Pet Finder photo, looked like a Maltese. One of the boxes I'd ticked. White curly hair, looking over his shoulder with a winsome face. I'd also ticked older. I knew I did not have the temperament for a puppy. As Brett and I were en route to the Reno Humane Society to meet the dog, the Quincy shelter called to say that so far applicants for the kittens had only wanted the male. If you'll take both, they're yours. Well, I absolutely want both, I said, and whooped with joy as Brett and I drove on to Reno. Gregario, as the shelter named him, had been abandoned. All that curly fur turned out to have been matted and full of fleas, and after taking the photo, the shelter had sheared everything except his ears, which, including the fur, almost touched the ground. Under that body-wide buzz cut, his skin was a bright pink. He was sunburned. His teeth, crooked and rotten, stuck out of his mouth in all directions. He looked nothing like a Maltese. His legs were very short, his body very long, his eyes very sad. In no way was this dog cute. His teeth were the epitome of snaggled. He was too long to curl on my lap, not to mention those terribly, irrevocably sad eyes. But he was abandoned. As an older dog, 11, he'd be hard to place. This was early August. A poster on the wall behind the shelter's outtake desk announced that they'd placed over 4,000 animals in the past month. So many people want companions these days, said Cindy, the cheery girl behind the desk. Cats and dogs, of course, but being in the desert, we also place snakes and rats and ferrets. I nodded, curiously close to tears. You don't have to do this, said Brett. I think I do, I said. Cindy explained that at first I'd be fostering. In order to officially adopt, I'd need to bring him back. The shelter would take care of those rotten teeth, and then he'd be mine. They'll pull them, she said, just as I finished signing the papers. And then his little tongue will hang out all the time, she demonstrated. So cute. My sister and I exchanged a look. Not just the sad eyes, not just the body too long to properly cuddle, but a dog with its tongue hanging out all the time. But I could see no way to back out, at least not at that moment. 2 days later, I left the dog with Brett and drove to Quincy to fetch the cats. I named them Boo and Radley. The love was immediate and complete. But the dog? Well, I'd read up on separation anxiety. I was clueless about how intense it was going to be. I also didn't know that any dog, not just an abandoned one, likes to be with you / know where you are at any and all moments. In the kitchen, outside watering, on the toilet. The bottomless need, especially as conveyed by those spaniely eyes, unnerved me. It was August, too hot to leave him in a car while I shopped for groceries, but neither could I leave him alone. I dropped him with my sister every few days and ran errands as quickly as I could. I felt utterly trapped. It all became an existential metaphor, coiling itself around everything I did and thought. It's all about surface with you, my mind bickered. It's like that Scottish poet with the bad teeth. You still regret that you ignored his overtures. No wonder you're alone. It did not help that a friend warned me that older terriers develop heart trouble and limb trouble, that the care would be increasingly heartbreaking and expensive. Even though by this time I'd named him Mr. Darcy, which British formality suited him, and I argued, even charming Mr. Darcy gets old sometime, I knew I simply could not keep him. I called the shelter. That's fine, said the calm voice at the other end. Our first available appointment for a surrender is Friday. Surrender. Not relinquish, not hand over, not give back. No, surrender. To yield something to the possession or power of another. Deliver up possession of. Synonyms include waive and renounce, cede and, yes, abandon. So there I was, making an appointment to re-abandon. I had almost a week before the surrender, and to my surprise, I was glad. It gave me time to realize what I'd miss. His body beside me in the car, especially his delight putting his head out the passenger side window and letting the wind have at his ears. How he loved romping with my sister's dogs. The way Radley and Boo bumped their heads beneath his chin in greeting each morning, and how the three of them created a welcome weight across the foot of my bed at night. And how the walks with him, morning, midday, and especially evening, slowed me down. While he snuffled around, checking his pea mail, doing his business, I took in early sun glinting through branches and stars wheeling across the sky. I was also coming to enjoy the chance meetings along paths and roads, pulling up our masks, keeping our distance. We watched our dogs pee and sniff while talking of breeds and weather and the color of moss on a nearby tree. Utterly pleasant conversations about nothing vital. I called the shelter and changed the appointment. No longer to surrender him, but to have those teeth pulled. When I picked him up from that operation, he'd no longer be a dog I was fostering, but one I had officially adopted. It was a long day. The drive to Reno takes 2 hours, and I had to drop him before 7 a.m. He could not be released until late afternoon. As I waited, masked, outside, aware of what was now irrevocably in motion. Smoke from the summer's ravaging fires hovered, making my eyes smart and my nose run as if I was weeping. I wasn't, but I understood that I was learning a different definition of surrender. Late that afternoon, after signing the papers that meant he was now mine, I carried him, conked out on painkillers, to the car. They'd removed 19 of his 42 teeth. As I lowered him into his bed in the front seat, he woke for a moment and looked at me with eyes that are not, in fact, limited to sad. That's just the shape of them. He gave my hand a lick. I saw then that his tongue would not loll out. They'd left the 2 bottom fangs. I tucked a blanket around him, and we headed home.
Yeah, bravo. That was beautiful. Thank you, Kelley. And thank you, Sands. Oh, there he is. If you can see Sands, she is holding up little Mr. Darcy. Oh, my goodness. Precious. All right. And next, we have Letting Go by Joshua Mohr.
A man pulled a knife on us today. We were at 7-Eleven buying Twizzlers to take to Green Lake. While I locked up our bikes, you looked at him, said, "Hi." And he said, "What the fuck are you looking at?" And your 7-year-old eyes went wide at me. "What's happening, Daddy? Am I safe? Will you protect me?" He wasn't homeless, but was living a hard lifestyle, which I know because I used to live one too. There were 3 cars in the lot, people watching us through their dirty windshields like televisions. I pointed at the man who'd spooked you and said, "Don't talk to her, motherfucker. You talk to me." As I screamed at him, you studied me, seeing a side of your old man otherwise unavailable to you. There was no yelling, no fists in our life with Mama. Our house was happy, crazy, what we called silly goose's time. So you stared at me. Who the hell is this guy? Good thing, too, your eyes fixating on a dad you didn't know, a dad who was about to devolve, because that was when he flashed the knife. Pulling up the front of his shirt, showing the blade handle tucked between his jeans and his drawers, smiling at me, teasing me, fucking daring me. And I became a chimp. I felt something called unevolved anger. Once he swore at you, once the knife was revealed. It wouldn't have mattered to me if he were 5 men or 5 hyenas. I put up my fists and approached him. And he flinched, even though I didn't throw a punch. I knew right then that he didn't know how to fight. And so I wrapped my hands around his throat. And so I choked him. I was going to end his life for you. Technically, this would be considered an overreaction, but there's no such thing as a technicality to a chimp. Victor Hugo said, "If a soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed." To Hugo, I'd say, maybe that held true when you were still around, but these days, sins thrived in sunlight, floated freely in our fresh, viral air. My hands were around his neck and his eyes bulged. He'd given up already. He didn't want this. He didn't even make a move to snag the knife. No, he'd forgotten all about it once I constricted his windpipe, putting his hands on top of mine, trying to pry me off. I stole a glance at you, watching. Another technicality, this was probably not good parenting. I knew that. Of course, I knew that. But how was I supposed to let go of him after seeing the knife so close to you. He was maybe withdrawing or resenting the fact that the virus had stripped his world of a job, a place to live. There were more people living on the streets every day. I worried about it at night. Will we be another family shivering in a tent, living at the lake? I didn't have any answers. I was a chimp, with my hands around someone's throat. I hated doing that in front of you. It was wrong. But the unevolved anger, it wasn't a choice. I wanted to swing in a tree, scarf a banana, carry you, my baby, on my back as you clutched my fur, as we walked away from danger together. He's a sickly red color now. Take your hands off him, Josh. Take your daughter away from here. Don't tell her you love her so much, and that affection makes murder easy. Don't put this on her. These are your fingers tightening, your knuckles cracking. And why do you like that emptying look in his face? What about this are you enjoying? Stop. I don't know how. You have to. It's love in my veins, not hate. No, it's my love squeezing his neck. If I finish this, I'll be in a real cage and I'll never see you again, or only through bulletproof glass, and that lonely window would destroy me. So I know what I have to do. Loosen grip, lower hands. See him back up a couple steps and cough and wheeze and breathe. Breathe like a baby pulling in its first gulp, then gasping, then crying. See him recede. See the audience, whose famished voyeurs disappear back into apps and errands. See us, up on our bikes, go down to the lake. See our feet slip in the cold water, dangling off the edge of the dock. See a few of those ducklings swim like drunk drivers. Let's try and stay here, hide as long as we can, you and me on the edge of this dock, dangling feet, licorice smacking around our mouths. See me saying, "So you must have some questions about that." See me saying, "I'll do anything to keep you safe, even if that means letting go."
Wonderful. Thank you, Brennan. A very different story, as you'll see. These are going to be very up and down. So thank you. That was incredible. That story very much stuck out to me. As you can tell, why? Wonderfully read. Thank you very much. And thank you, Joshua. I don't know if you've logged on yet, but wonderful story. Our next story, for something completely different, is Mindfulness 2020 by Deborah Meltvedt.
I'm taking an online course on mindfulness. It's teaching me how to breathe, teaching this introverted, anxious, sorry excuse for a social emotional teacher to relax so I can teach my students to breathe. It's supposed to be about safety and acceptance and being present in an overwhelming world. But I am getting pissed off. I have to introduce myself on discussion boards to strangers and post a photo of me and say what I like about other people's posts. It's forcing me to extrovert online in a fucking mindfulness class. I am very mindful of how this mindfulness class is stressing me out. So I jump to lesson 3, mindful walking. My husband asked to come along. I love my husband, but he cannot help himself. He cannot help but extrovert. to wave hello to neighbors, to comment on their lawn or running injuries or the weather. Oh, it's an affliction. I keep my eyes ahead, tugging on my husband's arm, reeling in his words like a fish caught on my hook of introversion, vowing to let him breathe once we're back at home. The next day, I try it on my own. I take myself and my breath for a walk, forgetting how tethered breath can be for me, a Pekingese on steroids. I pull up on the leash, reminding myself of the class's mantra. Breathe in, breathe out. Use your anchor words. Thoughts are just thoughts. Feelings, just feelings. Breathe in, breathe out. Scan your body. Feel the earth beneath your feet. Oops. My mind breaks loose. I feel the earth move under my feet. I need new shoes, but am I really a size 7? I should size up. Oh God, I can't sing. I need to eat more fruit. Why aren't they moving off the sidewalk? I was here first. Why aren't they thanking me for moving off the sidewalk? Oh, look, a duck. Hi, duck. God, I'm getting old. I'm going to die soon, but the days are so long. I wonder how I will die. I hope it's not trapped in an earthquake or elevator or a cave. The doctor said my heart is good. Fucking high HDL. Oh, God, I'm glad I quit smoking. God, I could really use a cigarette right now. Oh, if they don't get off the fucking sidewalk. I wonder why I never played an instrument. If I learned guitar, I could be somebody on Facebook. I should bake something from scratch. Something with lard. What is lard? Why are 7s so hard to add? I should write a novel now. I should write a novel because I have the time. Oh, but I think I need a plot, like an actual idea. People who write novels have actual ideas. God, where in God's name is my poetry gone? Have I used it all up? Like estrogen? God, I'm getting old. I think electrocution would be okay when I'm 90. Like maybe out flying a kite or riding a bike on the golf course and then zap. I think I might be a socialist. Why the hell did I agree to a 10-pound bag of carrots from Rayleigh's delivery? We don't even have a horse. Oh, I wish I had a horse. If I had learned to ride a horse, I could be somebody on Facebook. 7 times 6 is what? I should write a novel, but I'm not sure if I've suffered enough. Oh, I should suffer more. Oh, I am suffering now if those kids don't space themselves 6 feet apart. Who are those parents? If I was a parent, I would be somebody on Facebook, especially if my kids played guitar and rode ponies or at least could sing. Or if I had a funnier cat. Huh. Jack needs to up his game at our house. God, my neck hurts. Why didn't my husband become a massage therapist? Ooh, dang, that's an ugly dog. I should memorize all the state capitals. I could be somebody then. Huh. I wonder what my hair will do today. Should I throw caution to the wind and just buy a 5th curling iron? No, I should just cut it all off. Oh, God, I'm so vain. You're so vain, you probably think this walk is about you, don't you, don't you? Oh God, I wish I could sing. Mom was so good at singing. I miss you, Mom. You would have told us to move out of the way and get off the fucking sidewalk. You would have been somebody on Facebook. Breathe in, breathe out. Oh, look, there's another duck.
I love this piece, and I could hear Kelley reading it, and Deborah, my goodness, this is such a funny piece. So thank you very much, and thank you, Kelley, because that was fantastic.
Thank you, Kelley. Well done. Thanks. Fun to hear.
In your head, man. I feel you. Cool. All right. Our next piece, again, for something completely different. This is The Arsonist by P. Joshua Laskey.
If you lit the match, you might now be watching the particles of soot and ash dancing in the glare of the floodlight in your own backyard, contemplating how they not only represent the lives you've destroyed, but are also literal bits of them floating unconnected on the warming night air. If you'd fanned the flames, you might now be amused at how the winds of fortune could have changed so dramatically after blowing through whole subdivisions of backwater cities and down remote main streets and backcountry towns to suddenly be carrying embers to your very doorstep. If you'd poured gasoline on the fire, you might now be wondering which Jake from your department figured out your guilty little pleasure and managed to take you by surprise from behind, gag you, blindfold you badly, and then hogtie you to a patio chair where you're still sitting, waiting for a final blaze of poetic justice.
Yeah, that's one of our flash pieces. Thank you very much, Brennan, and thank you, Joshua. Very creepy. Thank you so much. Thinking inside the mind of an arsonist. All right. And now our next piece is Mother, My Monster by Anita Felicelli.
When he first arrived that autumn, Monster was dark and small. On arrival, he burrowed into the tender crannies of his new home, shifting tissue, an errant squatter assiduously lodging himself away from the wildfires that burned outside. And he was not merely one, but multifarious, and each of his many forms was monstrous, but a little different. Each of the folds of Mother's brain, a roller coaster. He played hide and seek in the gray crevices, pleasure palpable. At first, Mother didn't notice the trespasser. Monster stayed quiet, speechless at first, so as not to disturb her, so as not to arouse attention. This is how monsters marry their hosts. A few months passed. Monster had interfered with all of the signals, triggered a sleepy roll of fatigue, a fog rolling into every lit recess of Mother's mind, turning it dark, and Mother wanted to sleep, wanted to rest. Meanwhile, outside Mother's body, the baby crawled through the smoky world. Mother delighted in all the movement, in the way the light and shadows of the living room patterned the baby's face and romper, quixotic smiles, cooing. Monster sat and watched, growing stronger, growing faster. The thin, grasping hands of the clock traveled forward slowly, a series of ticks to engrave the passage of time, and, as time grew deeper, both baby and monster grew. And in what seemed like a blink, it was autumn again, and Mother was pregnant with another baby, and the monster found its power shrinking. It wasn't clear what was happening at first because monsters' forms continued to ride the folds of the brain, reshaping them. Monster felt energy leaching away, slowly disappearing as if each of its forms had been irradiated by the baby. And almost immediately after Mother birthed that baby, she became pregnant with another baby. And with this baby, the forms disappeared, and Monster breathed a tremendous sigh. Mother had been comfortable, but the baby seemed to take everything Mother had to offer, everything of the self that Monster would have liked, eating and cooing in the dreaming dark of the womb. Far away in her brain, Monster wondered what it would be like to be inside Mother in this other way, cared for, loved. The monster sighed again with heavy longing. The new baby was birthed, and he and his two older sisters grew, slowly at first. The years slid by, one after the other, the tick and the tock of them, the chime of the grandfather clock at every hour. Monster noticed Mother not noticing the hours, too busy watching with pleasure as her babies toddled up and down the stairs, first the palace steps, and then steps under the sea. And Mother didn't notice not noticing the time either, even though the time between wildfires grew shorter and shorter. Every once in a while there were clear days. While everybody huddled in their houses, the babies began riding their scooters around the driveway, racing to see who would go fastest, illuminating the bright black, porous asphalt with fat pastel chalks. Monster thought he glimpsed himself in the little girl's portrait, a dark spot of asphalt in a swirling gold and orange scribble of fire. But of course, he couldn't say anything, couldn't pat her on the back and tell her she did a good job noticing. A pity. His mission was a silent one. Silence is never the posture of the weak. It's the strategy of the strong and wily. Monster gained strength and power as Mother, his gracious host, sat there in the sunlight, watching the children grow. And Monster watched as Mother visited men in white coats, puny and terrifying in their human desire to know, to search him out, to sight his presence in the fog of her mind. The men in white coats paid her complaints no mind, and Monster smiled. But as time passed, the semaphores led to the monster being spotted in all his many forms, his glory instantiated here and here and here and here. The men in white coats examined the forms it took on her brain and on her spine and plotted Monster's defeat. Of course, battle strategy being what it is, and the war having been mounted long before, the men in white coats were starting from a position of weakness, and the monster had a home court advantage. Still, the men in white coats were armed and slowed the multiplication of the monster while making Mother weaker. He couldn't reproduce himself as quickly as he had before. No more roller coaster rides, no more moving tissue this way and that, snapping electrical signals, carefully loving and destroying the mother. Monster smiled to himself. He knew any defeat was only temporary. From the moment he'd trespassed, he'd had Mother in his clutches. Eventually, he would fell her, and his darkness, ever so strong, would suffuse her entire body, take residence in every cell of her brain and spine until she was crumpled on her knees in his thrall. Years passed this way, the mother and monster becoming not friends, but familiars, on intimate footing. Monster tap danced up and down the mother's spine, his every form finding new ways to wreak mischief. And Mother learned to accept Monster's presence, even as she continued to visit the men in white coats, and as they were, over time, her only hope at preventing the monster from loving her to death. Mother's children grew too, taller and wider and limbs loose and rangy with joy. Monster came to feel Mother and her children were his kin. Soccer tournaments and birthday parties, children's theater and science fairs. Most of the time, Monster kept Mother at home. She would be happier there at home, resting. And if Monster noticed Mother crying from exhaustion or prostrate on the bed, wishing it would just be over, if Monster noticed how Mother clutched her face at the cold and pain efflorescing there, or startled at nimble electric pain rushing her spine, or the surging sensation in her legs, the sensation that her legs were both being squeezed too hard, if Monster noticed Mother needed a wheelchair and began shaking, Monster didn't feel it needed to relent or sympathize. Only natural, he thought. And there were, in all these years, both a kernel of horror and a kernel of joy. And these two kernels sprouted and grew into vines that intertwined until it became impossible to disentangle them, to distinguish horror from joy, to allow either to blossom in its entirety. The children left and left and left. And Mother, alone in her wheelchair, sat by the closed window. Her hands trembled, and she couldn't quite remember where the children were, or even how to speak, but she watched the dry, shaking maple leaves fall limply from the tree as smoke obliterated stars. She was uncertain about what else this meant as she watched it all burn down.
Wow. Thank you, Kelley. And thank you, Anita. Thank you for giving us this story. I think Shelley or Dorothy mentioned this is the first time it's been published, so thank you, because my God, it's very affecting, very, very affecting, beautifully written, so thank you, and wonderfully acted, as usual. Thank you. Okay, our next one is a lighter note. This is A Letter to Our Loyal Customers by Devara Berger.
It is with deep sadness that I must inform you that after a long run, COVID-19 is forcing us to close down our petting zoo, and that we must relocate Siegfried, one of our beloved creatures, to a remote island where he can live out his days. For those of you unfamiliar with our unique petting zoo, we are the first and only zoo to include crocodiles and alligators. And while our petting zoo program has been a bumpy ride for our investors and some customers, it was hardly an experiment in terror, as one critic so narrow-mindedly dubbed it. We believe our program raised the consciousness of visitors, promoted awareness of these animals' value, and that, as with any other creature on God's green earth, they deserve to be cherished. Except for that incident with Wendy, a dementia patient who periodically wandered onto our grounds and whose mechanical arm is now functioning beautifully. The program did succeed in discouraging theft on our property, although our insurance rates skyrocketed. But who, in this time of COVID, has not suffered some economic hardships? You may be wondering what will become of our alligators, Winston, Tron, and Wyatt Burt, and our crocodiles, Rita, Samantha, and Gilda. Rest assured, arrangements have already been made to transport them to a famous, unsuspecting politician's golf course in Florida. After that unfortunate fiasco leading up to the lawsuit that almost shut us down, we have become adept at administering the precise level of sedation for safely and easily moving our reptiles. As for that aforementioned fiasco, honestly, you'd think nursing home patients have never seen large reptiles before in their lives. This was pre-COVID, of course, when we were still bringing our reptiles into facilities such as nursing homes as comfort companions for the lonely, and the uninsured. Incidentally, we were told that the number of residents who remembered to wear their dentures and suddenly wanted to be mobile escalated with our visiting reptile program. Of course, our biggest draw for the past few years was Siegfried, our magnificent Carnotaurus, which means man-eating bull, a reference to the bull-like horns on this unique theropod's head. Such a darling and wonderfully sweet boy, whose only misstep was chewing off the fingers of his prison inmate trainer, Billy Butt. Billy, that delightful ex-con, had such a wonderful sense of humor about it all. Did it hurt, you ask? Billy liked to say to visitors about those missing fingers. Man, it was dino-sore for weeks. We considered making t-shirts with that slogan, but our attorneys advised against it. Luckily, COVID-19 has made it easier for us to find a suitable island home for Siegfried. You would think it would be the opposite, but to our shock and happiness, we found a place for our sweet baby, who brought so much joy to thousands of terrified visitors over the years. Some who were apparently unable to read the warnings not to hold their babies out for Siegfried to lick. Honestly, we had those damn warnings posted in all the major Romance languages as well as sign language. Duh. While COVID has put an end to our educational enterprise, this pandemic has inspired us to think outside the reptile and dinosaur box. In the spirit of continuing to serve communities and facilitate safe social distancing, we will soon launch a new venture called Lions and Tigers and Bears Oh My. This latest addition to our business will allow you to rent any of the aforementioned animals. These lovely critters will allow you to effectively enforce a respectable distance from others at all times. As an added safety measure, our lions, tigers, and bears will be trained to eat anyone not wearing a mask. Want to hold a rally and not worry about people breaking the protocols for safe socialization? Well, now you can. You can enjoy a wedding, birthday party, bar mitzvah, or bat mitzvah, and more with absolute safety. Unfortunately, since this is a new program, you will need to secure your own liability insurance. As soon as we work out some of the legal issues, have enough plasma on hand for the occasional faux pas and the inevitable little nips and chomps and severed limbs, this new program will be operational. In closing, and on behalf of all of us at Siegfried and Crocs, we want to thank our loyal customers. You psychopaths know who you are, and the many fools and idiots who visited our compound out of curiosity and lived to regret it. Thank you all, and a special thank you to COVID-19 for pointing us in a new direction. Sincerely, the management at Siegfried and Crocs, soon to be known as the Gatorade and Resplendent Reptile Repository.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Wonderful reading. You can hear the laughs. Oh my goodness. And I'm watching everyone's face just cracking up. Devara, that's such a funny story. Thank you so much for giving it to us. It's just hysterical and dry and so well read, Brennan. Thank you. That's just how I was picturing it. Thank you so much.
Thank the reader as well. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. All right. And I don't know that Pam has made it yet, but our final story is Pam Houston's Stamina. I checked to make sure she wasn't here yet. So Pam, if you're here, you can say hello. I don't think she's here yet. That's okay. But this is Stamina by Pam Houston.
A lamb was born here on Saturday, a little ram. And when I say little, I mean it. He was a preemie, born late in the spring, conceived a month after the usual end of mating season. The last thing we need around here is another ram. We have two already, and though they are best friends, they spend most of the time with the top of their heads grotesquely bloodied, doing to each other exactly as their name suggests. Sometimes, for fun, they ram me, taking me down from behind at the knees. These are Icelandic sheep, which are, any shearer will confirm, the wildest of the domestic breeds. The rams have large circular horns, big enough to do some damage. My Icelandics have fought off coyotes, a mountain lion, and a black bear. And though some of them lost the battle, some of them, including Elsie, the mother of this little preemie, won, which is why she is alive to birth another ram, which, as I mentioned, is the last thing we need. It is the ewes who protect the herd from predators, while the rams, the ones with the great big horns, cower in the back. It is also the ewes who protect their babies from the very rams who provided the sperm that created them. I have seen a ram toss a newborn into the air minutes after birth. Luckily, lambs bounce. The ranchers in this valley will tell you it is only the boys the rams go after in order to cut down competition, but I have seen a ram lift a tiny mewling female into the air likewise, and as I was running to get them separated, I have seen the 5-minute postpartum ewe pin that ram, who weighs a third, again, as much as she does, to the ground. Saturday's lamb was the tiniest ever, and more than a little listless, not eager to nurse. Icelandics always give birth mid-morning, so the baby has the maximum hours of warmth and daylight to get steady on his feet and well fed. Over the course of the long afternoon, I prompted the little ram to nurse successfully at least twice, but Elsie wasn't doing much to encourage him, which made me think she had already given him up for dead. There was always the thought, when a ewe shows little interest, that she might know more than I do, might know the lamb has some genetic defect or that one of his internal systems isn't right. I live at high altitude, so even this far into May, the temperature was forecast to dip into the low 20s. After nightfall, Elsie wasn't even trying to keep the little ram warm, and he was too out of it to seek comfort himself. I bundled up in my fleece-lined pants, my down parka, and wool hat to sleep in the barn with Elsie and her baby. Why didn't I take the baby into the warm house with me? I was still hoping Elsie wouldn't reject him outright. Bottle babies are a lot of fun, but they rarely get the nutrition and antibodies they need to thrive to their fullest capacity. What you learn on a ranch is that the sweetest things die. And there are few things in the world sweeter than the tight, tight curls of a newborn Icelandic sheep, or the warm breath that rises up and out of him, or when he licks your chin with his tiny pink tongue. A year from now, should this baby live, he will be big and strong enough to break my kneecaps. But this summer, he will bound around the pasture chasing butterflies, baaing his sweet high-pitched baa, and tumbling through the grass with his older girl cousins. Most of my neighbors would tell you I had already gone too far trying to save him, that I should always let nature take its course. But I'm not a rancher. I'm a writer, a teacher, a progressive, an activist, a woman who raises Icelandic sheep and names them. COVID has kept me home for 3 solid months and connected me more intensely than ever to my animals. Sleeping in the barn with the preemie feels like a natural extension of all that. Elsie bedded down away from the lamb, and I lowered myself to the ground with my back against a haystack and pulled the baby into my lap. I let him snuggle. He snuggled into my down jacket, making little sucking sounds. Every time he wanted up, I let him, but then he would just stand there, staring at the wall, swaying. So I would scoop him back up and he'd bed down again. At first light, I got him to nurse a little, but Elsie wouldn't stand still long enough for him to get much milk. By 8 a.m., he had lost the use of his back legs and was shaking, no matter how tight I held him, a sure sign he was starving to death. There is no substitute for authentic ooze milk, but I went to the house and mixed up some Save-A-Lamb milk replacer. The baby was too weak to suck, too weak by then to care. So I force-fed him, not with a tube, just with a bottle. I forced the nipple into his mouth and rubbed his throat to make him swallow and didn't let him out of my lap until 2 ounces of the milk was gone. With newborns, if you're going to see improvement with milk replacer, you usually see it quickly, and I wasn't seeing much. He had stopped shaking, but his eyes were dull and he was still unwilling to stand. By that time, I decided if he was going to die, I could give him some comfort while he did it. I rocked him and kissed his lanolin-smelling head, his sweet little nubbins of horns. He weighed, it seemed, almost nothing. Elsie watched me, a little coldly, I thought, from her corner of the enclosure. What do you know that I don't know? I asked her, but she just chewed her cud. I didn't know what was wrong with the little ram, but I did know that 100,000 Americans would be dead from COVID by the end of the weekend. I knew the real number was actually higher because several states, Florida, Georgia, Texas, had been cooking their COVID books. I knew the vast majority of the dead, grandmothers and grandfathers, husbands and wives, doctors and nurses, daughters and sons, had died without their loved ones there beside them, and I knew tens of thousands of those deaths were unnecessary, due only to the colossal failure, perhaps intentional, of the Trump administration and its enablers in the GOP. I knew that our government was being intentionally dismantled from within. I knew that by virtue of being an outspoken woman, I was no longer safe here at my beloved ranch. And I also knew that on the scale of who is and is not safe in this country, I fared infinitely better than most. I knew that it was long past time for those selfish and shameful men to relinquish control of this country into the hands of women. I knew that it was time for women to step into the power that they have been gaslighted out of believing was theirs all along. I knew I had some role in that perhaps we all did, and I knew I needed to figure out what it was. I spent all Sunday in the barn and force-fed that little ram 6 more times, 2 ounces every 2 hours. He got so sick of me shoving the rubber nipple into his mouth that the 7th time he got up, bobbed and weaved over to Elsie and started nursing. I spent Sunday night in the barn too, but by then he was toddling around again, and Elsie was showing a bit more interest. Mostly, he slept curled up against her, coming over to sniff at me once an hour or so, maybe making sure I was warm enough. By Monday morning, it seemed, for the first time, that the little ram might make it. Before the day was over, a Minneapolis policeman named Derek Chauvin would kneel on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, killing him dead. When I was a girl, my father broke many things that belonged to me. My femur and my hymen, to name the 2 most significant. He crumpled 16 of his cars around my body and his own, driving drunk and careless and angry. Then there was the psychological torture. See any Trump tweet of the last 72 hours or of any 72 hours, which I still insist was the worst torture of all. Surviving my father's house took hypervigilance and wiliness, the ability to separate my mind from whatever was being done to my body. Most of all, it took stamina. 17 years of it. The drumbeat always in my head saying, keep your eyes open, plan for the worst case scenario, stay alive at any cost, survive long enough to get out. By first light on Tuesday, the little ram's legs worked perfectly. I spent parts of the next 3 days and nights in the barn, and then it warmed up enough to send me back to my own bed. Now, he's a week old, skipping across the outdoor enclosure, bouncing off the walls of the stall, crawling all over Elsie, and ramming the holy hell out of the water trough. He weighs 4 times what he did last Saturday, and when I lift him, I feel his warm, rounded belly full. The milk replacer's closed up and put away for next year, and even now, every time he sees me, he runs straight over to Elsie to nurse. I am not any sort of a hero. I saved the ram because I thought maybe I could. I saved him because none of my heartfelt writing, nor my activism, nor my passionate progressive values could save George Floyd. I saved him because cities are burning all across my country, and a man I can't keep straight anymore from my dead father promised to do this to us, and now he is doing it every day. I saved him to mitigate, if slightly, the wave of grief that is raining down on us, to prove to myself that I have both the strength and the stamina to save at least one small, fragile thing. I left my father's house when I was 17 and did not expect to find myself at 58 back in it, along with my 330 million brothers and sisters. To beat COVID, to beat these soulless goons whose endgame is always cruelty for cruelty's sake, we are going to have to play the long game, all of us together, even if the men with the big horns cower in the back. I can't run quite as fast as I used to, nor kick quite as hard, but what I haven't lost over the decades is stamina. Sleeping in the barn for a week to save a lamb whose mother left it for dead may not sound like much, but my mother left me for dead too, so often in my father's bed, and now you ought to see how I can ram a water trough. You ought to see how I still bounce. Elsie looks at me with a little more respect these days than she used to. In the wilds of Iceland, she might have had to abandon that baby, but here, she has a barn full of hay and a woman just tenacious enough to believe she can save anything. Maybe some lives. Maybe democracy. This morning, and only this morning, I named the little ram Tank.
Thank you so much, Kelley. That was fantastic. And Pam's writing, I mean, man, every time. I'm going to turn this back over to Dorothy and Shelley, I think, to sort of round us out here.
Yeah, that was amazing. All of the performances, all of the stories, and so different, like the waves of emotion.
Well, as always, it's just stunning to hear work read aloud. And I just thank the 2 actors who did that today. Thank you for the gift of your talents. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
I just want to add that I think this whole idea of this anthology is, Dorothy and Shelley, just incredible. And I've had numerous friends who've ordered it and reading it. And I think when you make your way through it, it's like you just have an experience. Like some things are things you experience and some things are metaphorically what you experienced. And it's just a really amazing idea that you pulled this group of writers together to create this anthology. And I know it was a ton of work. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Hillary.
Dorothy and Shelley and Sue and everyone involved. I want to say that I'm making my way through it. I'm digesting. It's always so different, obviously, reading than hearing than watching. It's just, I feel very lucky to be able to experience it all with this anthology. And I must say, with the variant and with all the issues resurfacing, I listened even to pieces I've read already. I listened and heard it anew because of what we're in now. So it has it has a re-life, to use that re-up again that one of the writers used. It's alive again. Let us hope not for 2022, but in the moment, it was for me. And thank you.
Yeah. Who would have thought when we were putting it together and you were submitting your stories that we would be where we are today?
Yep.
With so many of these pieces as relevant today as ever. And of course, they will stay evergreen because the issues are transcendent. There's always some form of monster out there. Yeah.
I just wanted to say too that I think the book is beautiful. It came out just beautifully, and Angela did a great job designing it. And I feel like it's a really high quality publication.
Oh, thank you. And that means a lot coming from Krista.
It just looks really good.
Yeah. And you had a lot to do with that. Your copy editing was really valuable.
To help anytime.
I'll take you up on that.
But it was a great project to be involved with. I'm really, really proud of the work everybody did, and just think it looks really good.
Yeah. So I don't forget, we do have another event scheduled. Is it August 11, Shelley, at Capitol Books, downtown Sacramento?
That's right.
I think some of our authors plan to come, many of you on the call here. And all authors are welcome. All guests are welcome. It's more of an informal thing than this. We don't plan to read a bunch of stories, but more to be available to sign books and interact and talk. And we'll have some drink and munchies as well. It's 1 to 4 on 11, sort of like a reception sort of thing. Yeah. And there is information on Capitol Books website. So you can go there to check it out. And if any of you have venues to suggest to us, we're happy to go on the road with this anthology and open it up to, any or all of our authors to have your stories. We may not be able to have actors every time, but to perform your stories, read your stories. We'd love to get more exposure for them. So yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to those commenting in the chat as well. All of that means a lot to us. It was a lot of work, but it feels like, as Krista said, it's a beautiful book and something substantial.
I would just say it's always a pleasure. I mean, Brennan and I were both, as actors, you're only as good as your material, right? So, I think we've probably both had our share of you get scripts sometimes and you're like, oh man, how am I going to make this work? But first of all, like stories on stage, it's always enjoyable. It's always quality writing. But I think especially to have, pieces like this, I feel like we're all kind of having this conversation about what we've all been through. Now that we're trying to kind of come back in some way, I don't think it's back to normal. And just like reading the anthology and then bringing these pieces to life, I think it showed me personally, like all the ways in which I connected with what these writers were talking about in my own way and in my own experience as I went through and are going through this. So, my kudos to all of the writers and all of the work that you have. It's so much fun to play with point of view. It's so much fun to read and play with the different devices that all of these writers are using. That's just really interesting. So thank you.
Yeah, just a tag on to that. Overall, it was just a lovely, interesting spectrum of emotion and to, immerse oneself in, to witness, to hear, to see, and enjoyed just the whole range of all of it. It was a really, really interesting and moving collection to be involved with.
7 amazing performances, I have to say. And
thank everybody. First of all, it was a tremendously entertaining evening. and really high quality. And this effort that all of you put into it, whether you wrote, whether you read, whether you published, whether you edited, I mean, you were all very inspiring. I'm not just saying that. I just think it's remarkable that we have such a fabulous community of writers in Northern California. It's incredibly inspiring. So it was wonderful meeting new people tonight, wonderful seeing old faces who've been just with over those of us that write together in Team Hague. But I'm just really in awe of what went on this evening, that it was so relaxed and entertaining and fun. So I want to thank all of you for that. That's a gift.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, it was an emotional roller coaster, the moods, from Sand's moving portrayal to the really tense drama of Joshua Mohr's piece. And then each one took you one place and then another, all of it very wrenching in different ways, which I think is very appropriate for the year we've just been through. That it really was a roller coaster year. You would just think you had ridden the wave and it was going to even out. And then there's a new crash. And that's how these stories felt. And of course, humor always leavens it tremendously, is so important. Yeah. So for Deb and Dev, thank you for letting us smile a little bit too. Not that we didn't smile at all the others, but a different kind of smile. Yeah. So yeah, buy the book, buy 2 or 3, tell your friends. We will, we did record this, and as soon as the recording is ready, we'll post it in all the usual places and get the word out. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, what a beautiful event. Really appreciate it.